every population that he went to recognized the need for extra nutrition to form and grow a new human being. And this is the wisdom of these people really puts us to shame. We tend to leave all these things to chance in modern culture. The sacred food among the Swiss villagers was a special type of butter. It was the butter that came from the cows when they first went to pasture in the spring. This butter was a deep orange color. And they actually had a ceremony where they put a bowl of butter on the altar in their church and lit a wick in the butter to honor the life-giving force in the butter. So I look forward to the day when we do this in all of our churches. Here's a picture of the bread. Normal loaves were quite a bit smaller. This is a festival loaf for Easter. And that loaf of bread will weigh, 20, 25 pounds. Very dense. They put a hole in the bread, and so they can hang it on a hook. The actual process of making the bread takes a few days. It's a very slow sourdough process. And then they hang it for at least 2 weeks to allow it to cure or to age, just like a ham or a bottle of wine. We recently learned that actually in these villages they only made bread twice a year. And so this bread lasted for 6 months, hanging up like that. Have a look at the beautiful facial structure of the woman. What Dr. Price referred to as the middle third of the face is very broad. She has very high cheekbones. This is the facial construction that we associate with beauty. The old actresses in the old black and white movies had this type of facial structure. It's disappeared today. We don't see that anymore. She's nice and slender in spite of their high-fat diet. And what I like best about this photograph is the hat. Isn't it beautiful? Now, everywhere that Dr. Price went, he could observe a world in transition, from the primitive peoples on their traditional foods to modernized people eating Western processed foods. And when he went to the villages in Switzerland where there was a road, there was invariably food stores. There weren't food stores in the primitive villages. Nobody bought food. They raised their own food. So there were food stores. And these stores contained what he called the displacing foods of modern commerce. So these were not only empty foods, but they were pushing out the nutrient-dense foods that they had eaten before. So this is jams and jellies and pastries, chocolates, white bread, canned foods, canned condensed milk, and another new factor in the Western diet, vegetable oils, something completely new to the human diet. Here, when he examined people's mouths, he found 1 tooth in 3 was decayed. So you've gone from less than 1% to 33% tooth decay. So lots of missing teeth. But even more concern to him, the children who were born after the parents changed their diet, basically after the road came to the village, did not have as broad a face, and there was not enough room in the jaw for the teeth to come in straight, so they had dental deformities. And he noted that the children with dental deformities were much more susceptible to diseases like tuberculosis. The other European group that he was able to study were some Gaelic people living off the coast of Scotland in the Outer Hebrides. This particular island that he visited had no commerce with the outside world. Here he found a very hardy, healthy population, virtually no tooth decay, no tuberculosis, and what struck him most was the good humor and spirituality of these people. No one had to lock a door. Everyone seemed to get along, and a very gregarious, talkative population. Now, these people lived on this foggy, windswept island. They could not keep animals there, so there was no meat in the diet, no eggs, no dairy foods. There were no vegetables in the diet, no fruit. They couldn't grow fruit. No broccoli. How could they possibly be healthy without broccoli? So what in the world were these people eating? Well, the number one source of calories in this diet was seafood. And not just the skinless fillets of the fish. They ate the heads, they ate the livers, they separated the oil of the livers and ate that. They had shellfish. They did have one green food, which was seaweed. And they also raised oats on the island, which they made into porridge and oat cakes. So this was a diet based on seafood and oats. And the sacred food, the food that children got every morning for breakfast to make sure they grew up healthy and strong, was, no, not quite, it was cod's head stuffed with oats and chopped cod's liver. Eat your breakfast, dear. These people lived in stone cottages covered with thatch, and they did not have chimneys in their cottages. So these people were living in smoky cottages all winter long. They had no lung disease, living in this secondhand smoke. And we will come back to this theme. It's a very interesting question. Why didn't they get lung cancer? Why didn't they have TB? When they were basically smoking all day long, breathing in smoke. But it was very important not to have chimneys because during the winter the thatch became blackened with the smoke, and that was their fertilizer. And in the spring they took the thatch off and spread it on the fields, and that was their fertilizer. Dr. Price took some of the island soil home with him and planted oats in the soil. This is oats planted in the island soil with no fertilizer added. These 4 pots had various types of commercial fertilizer added, and this pot had the blackened thatch added, and it was the only pot that got a mature crop of oats. Now, as these people became modernized on other islands where the foods had started to come in, tuberculosis became a big problem, and the health workers said, well, you need to put chimneys in your cottages so you're not breathing in smoke all the time. And they made the people put in chimneys, which did not solve the problem and did not answer the question why it was that these very primitive Gaelic people had no lung disease even though they were living in smoke all day long. Dr. Price went to Alaska into the hinterlands where he found superb examples of human form, and he often talked about, he would say, superb physical specimens, beautiful broad faces. He described her teeth as 2 rows of pearls. You can see the very wonderful facial structure. The babies were very sturdy and strong. They were alert, curious. They were very serious. Stared at him. You see how this baby is staring. But they never cried. He never heard crying babies in these traditional cultures. Here is another set of photographs. Dr. Price, by the way, took all these photographs. Many of these Eskimos had missing teeth or worn down teeth because they chewed on leather to make their clothes, and the leather, they had sand and grit. But even these worn down teeth, just almost worn down to the pulp, were not decayed. He found virtually no tooth decay among the primitive Eskimos. And he met a doctor who had spent 30 years in Alaska, and this doctor told him that he had never seen cancer, heart disease, any condition requiring an operation among the primitive Eskimos eating their traditional food. And he said the women gave birth so easily that it was impossible to get to a birth of an Eskimo woman. If they called the doctor, by the time he got there, she'd already had her baby. Very often the women gave birth at night when their husbands were asleep, and when the husband woke up the next morning, she would introduce him to the new baby. This was in sharp contrast to the situation in the towns where they were eating the white man's food, which was being brought in. The first thing that happened was rampant tooth decay. And here's the thing, the foods that caused the tooth decay had arrived in these villages, but the dentists hadn't gotten there yet. So there was tremendous pain from this tooth decay, and they became prone to suicide. And the reason given for suicide was the pain of tooth decay. But it was the next generation that gave Dr. Price the most cause for concern, because the children who were born after the parents changed their diet had dental deformities. There was not enough room in the jaw for the teeth to come in straight. So all of a sudden you're seeing dental deformities in a population that had none before. So this is not a genetic problem. This is a nutritional problem. And he noted in every culture that those who had dental deformities were more susceptible to other types of diseases. So going back to the healthy traditional Eskimo, we want to ask what kind of diet did they eat? The number one source of calories in this diet was animal fat, and this is not fish oil, but seal oil. So this is the fat of a mammal, which they're carrying here actually in the stomach of the seal. They used the seal oil for cooking, they used it for food storage, they used it for a dip or a dressing for their food, and they also had a special dish where they whipped up the ice cream, the seal oil till it was frothy, added a few berries, and that was the Eskimo ice cream for special occasions. Naturally, they ate a lot of game, both sea mammals and land mammals, and they did have one food combining rule, and that was that they never ate lean meat. And we find this actually all over the world. We found Stefansson, who lived with the Indians in Canada, said the same thing. They hunted the animals selectively. They wanted older, fat animals so they could get the fat. And when the hunting was good, they actually threw the lean meat away. What they saved of the lean meat was cut into strips and dried and smoked, and then when they went to eat it, they spread it with the fat. They also ate the fatty organs first, the brain, the marrow, the liver, and the tongue. So there was a tremendous emphasis put on the fat of the animal. They had a lot of fish in the diet, and the way they prepared the fish is most interesting. Very often they would throw the fish into a hole in the ground and cover it with earth or grass and allow the fish to ferment until it became sort of the consistency of ice cream. This is how they got their calcium, because they were eating the fermented fish bones. The reason they ate fermented foods was they noted that if they gave fresh fish to their dogs, the dogs could not pull the sleds all day long. But if they gave the dogs fermented fish, then the dogs had the stamina and strength to pull their sleds all day long. So they were great observers of nature. And they realized that if they ate this semi-rotten fish, that they too would have strength and stamina. And this is another thing we're going to find all over the world, the use of fermented foods to give you strength and stamina. We'll talk about why. So very, very few plant foods in this diet. About 80% of calories came from fat, and so it was a diet based on game and fish. The sacred food among the Eskimos was salmon roe, salmon eggs. And when they asked them why they went to such trouble to dry these salmon eggs, they're drying in the sun here, they said, we need these salmon eggs so we can have healthy babies. And it's quite amazing how much of the fish eggs that they ate. If you hear Honora Jones on Sunday, she gives a very interesting presentation on the Eskimo foods. Dr. Price spent a lot of time among Native Americans. The chapter in his book on Native Americans is fascinating. Now, these are not his photographs. These are famous photographs of a Navajo youth and Chief Sitting Bull, and you can see the beautiful facial structure. The truly primitive Native Americans were very tall. The natives of Texas were described as averaging over 7 feet tall. Very hardy. Texas Indians never wore clothes, even in the winter, and their favorite activity on a winter morning was to break the ice in a pond and all go swimming, without any clothes on, of course. Remember that the Native Americans did not have the horse until the white man arrived. They hunted on foot, and they could outrun a deer. So strong and fleet they were. These are photographs of Dr. Price of Native Americans living in Canada. You can see the uniformly good dental structure, a virtual absence of tooth decay, and he did not find any signs of any kind of disease or illness among these people. And they lived almost exclusively on animal foods, and they had the same food combining rule. They never ate lean meat. What they mostly wanted from the animals that they killed was the organ meats and the fat. And this was the tragic contrast between the modernized Indians living on reservations, eating the handout commodity foods. They suffered from tremendous tooth decay, and then in the next generation, you had the narrowing of the face. They were shorter, they tended to be overweight, and much more susceptible to disease. And Native Americans are particularly susceptible to diabetes, because they have this very slow